The little Snow-White dog opened his eyes and did not understand why her sister was crying. The girl, who for some reason found herself in the body of a dog, tried to climb higher. However, she couldn't. Something was boring. She was too weak. Her sister continued to hug the dog, and crying, she said that she still wanted to do so much for Coco. However, for some reason, she had to leave her and die. The girl was just a stupid dog that half of her sister's words could not understand. However, she, better than anyone in the world, sensed when her sister was sad. So Coco put her little furry paw on the girl's cheek in order to wipe away her tears and thus console her. Well, this only made the girl cry even more. She hugged her animal and said that she loved her very much. The moment Coco was filled with the smell of love and sad tears. Of course, she really didn't want her sister to cry, but she couldn't do anything about it. She didn't know what death was. However, since her sister was crying, she assumed that it was something sad. Coco just wanted her sister to be okay, and all because several years ago, it was this girl who saved this beautiful dog. Chloe was riding in a carriage, and the coachman suddenly stopped her abruptly because Coco ran out onto the road. He told the lady that a puppy suddenly jumped out in front of the carriage, so now that it is removed, they will be able to move on. Chloe, having heard about the puppy, immediately became interested. When Coco herself came closer to this girl, she felt a thick smell of loneliness, and at that moment, she realized that they were very similar. In the end, the lady asked that this puppy be brought into the carriage. Of course, the coachman began to persuade her not to do this because it was very dangerous and all that sort of thing. But the girl told him to bring the puppy, and it didn't matter that it could be a stray dog and that he could have various diseases. That day, having met her sister, Coco became the happiest puppy in the world. Now she could truly know what love and care are. Chloe named her and said that she was just like her, small and white, so she thought that everything should be okay. When the girl brought her to the estate, she immediately washed her, and now Coco had a lot of delicious food and a name, and together she could look through the love letters that Chloe sent. Sometimes, of course, Chloe scolded her because, for example, she ate human food, which could give her a very bad stomachache. However, she and her sister were together for so long that the flowers bloomed more than once. Coco was a very happy puppy, so she would most of all like to say how much she loved her owner. In the end, she just barked, and really hoped that her sister would understand that she had just said that she loved her very much. Of course, Chloe was incredibly upset because Coco was dying, and before her death, she asked that if the next life existed, she would really like it to be born as her daughter. Before Coco's eyes finally closed, she wished that even if she was not with Radam, her sister would live happily, and thus she would leave her sister and find herself in a completely new place for herself. It was quite a long journey to the dog star, where many different breeds of dogs lived, and Coco could also observe what was happening on Earth, and therefore she very often looked in on her mistress. However, it was even sadder there because many of the maids started talking about how she had gone crazy after the dog's death. She did not leave her separate pavilion for weeks and became even more eccentric than before. One day, she even gave the order for food to be brought, but she herself did not even take a spoonful into her mouth. The maids did not understand why she even asked for so much luxurious food to be prepared if she still did not eat it. Then the girls decided that this is exactly why they say that although she is from the same ducal family of Aries, but unlike her, Duke Tendency Angel is a real witch. They said a lot of different terrible things, and when Coco heard them all, she was very upset. But most of all, she was actually waiting for her sister to come to her. She knew that if Coco went and petted her, a smile would shine on her sister's face, and the day would immediately become very bright. She probably missed her little sister a lot, when suddenly the god of dogs came up to her. It was a huge golden retriever. He asked Coco why she didn't do anything. God said that Coco should go for walks like other dogs and also be able to eat sweet potatoes. Did she really want to become the most miserable dog on the entire dog star? Of course, Coco couldn't do all of that. She really wanted to see her sister smile more than she wanted to go for a walk and eat sweet potatoes. She would really like to somehow correct this situation. And then suddenly, an idea came to her mind. She turned to the god of dogs and said that she would very much like to be reborn as a human. The sister said that in the next life, she should have been born as her daughter. Of course, God said that it was impossible to do this. She would have been better off giving Coco a new toy or a very large sweet potato, but her wish was definitely impossible to fulfill. But Coco began to insist on her own. She screamed and said that she had to go to her sister. She didn't need anything else except that. She is too beautiful to be sent back to Earth. She could become a human. She would really want that. The god of dogs sighed heavily and thought that all dogs are the same. They want the completely impossible. But after he thought about it for a while, he said that he didn't want to give her the right to be reborn as a human, because all dogs who became human ended up suffering seriously. Coco immediately asked why this was so, and God explained that while her sister, being human, could not feel a real closeness to her, she would not be able to get rid of the fact that she was a dog. Of course, Coco didn't see any problem with this. She thought that she could simply become friends with her again. However, God said that it wasn't just about that. He explained that if her sister did not recognize her, then in 5 years she would return to the dog star. Coco, hearing that she would be able to live such a long period with her sister, was immediately delighted. God couldn't believe that she didn't understand all these risks at all, so he decided to clarify something. He asked, "If you live next to her in human form and then return back, won't your soul be even more sad?" Coco immediately jumped up and said that everything would definitely be fine. She was ready to do this just to be with her sister a little longer. The dog god continued to dissuade her. He said that sometimes people commit vile and bad deeds without a twinge of conscience, and he very much doubted that Coco would be able to withstand this. But Coco immediately said that she herself was very bad. She secretly ate the snacks that her sister told her not to eat and said that she would not lick the bandage, but she did it anyway. The god of dogs sighed heavily and replied that this was precisely why they were too kind. However, he still decided to approve of her wish. He said that since she would become a human, she would need a good ability. So he was going to give her 3 different useful abilities. The first was the ability to speak with animals and plants. The second was the ability to foresee the future, that is, the gift of prophecy. And finally, the last ability is intelligence, which will grow sharply in matters related to her sister. God said that all these abilities would help her survive on Earth after Coco was ready, and they provided her with a special road so that she could go there. Many other dogs lined up to accompany her and even started giving her various wishes so that she would say hello or say hello to someone. Coco was incredibly happy that she was actually given such a chance. She immediately told everyone present that she would do everything as needed and that they could rely on her. Of course, she was a small but rather brave puppy, and having received special abilities, she again went to a long-awaited meeting with her sister. Thus, Coco found herself in the Duchy of Ardos, but now in the role of a human. As soon as she opened her eyes for the first time, she immediately saw a familiar atmosphere. It was the mansion where her sister lived. That is, it was the human world. Coco immediately began to examine herself from all sides. She really had a human body, and her legs and arms were also like those of a real person. She couldn't believe her happiness that she actually became a real person and not a dog. Of course, these were completely new sensations for her, and in the end, of course, they couldn't make her her sister's daughter. Therefore, they decided to make her a real younger human sister. However, before being sent to Earth, God told her to remember the time she would spend in the human world, which would be 5 years, and she should in no case forget who she really is. When Coco got to the human world, she learned that her name remained the same there, too. She lived on the outskirts of the village, and then was adopted by the Ardas family. She was 5 years old, so the girl, standing on her feet, decided that it was time for her to go meet her little sister. But as soon as she stood up, she immediately couldn't keep her balance, because she was still unused to her legs, and fell right out of bed. Coco realized that using the human body turned out to be very difficult, much more difficult than she had imagined. Then suddenly someone knocked on her door, after which the maid came in and said that she heard a loud sound, after which she decided to go in and check if everything was okay. The girl looked at the maid with a surprised look, but immediately said that everything was fine with her, so she didn't have to worry. Then the young maid said that she was glad that everything was fine with her, after which she offered to help her change clothes, because perhaps she would soon have to leave the mansion. When Coco heard the word leave, she immediately asked what it meant, because she had never heard it before. The girl assumed that she most likely meant that they would go for a walk, so she smiled happily and told the maid that she really loved to walk. The maid felt very awkward about this and said in a quiet voice that they would not go for a walk, after which she handed her a piece of paper. There was written the reason why they were leaving the estate. It was an application to terminate the adoption and renounce guardianship. Coco was quite bad at reading. However, she was able to understand the word termination, but did not know its meaning. She immediately asked the maid what it all meant. In the end, no matter how bitter it was for the maid to talk about it, she still answered that it meant that Coco had to leave this mansion. The girl couldn't believe what she heard. Just 5 minutes ago, she was so happy that she would soon meet her little sister. And now, she was being kicked out of the house. In fact, quite recently, the Duchy of Ardos was sent a divine revelation. It said that they should adopt the child of the blessed God. And thanks to this child, the family would be exalted. They also had to present him with gifts, and then a sacred sign would appear on him. Thus, they would understand that in front of them was the so-called child of blessing. Of course, I hurried and adopted the so-called child of blessing. But a month ago, for some reason, this sacred sign disappeared from the child's body. Coco didn't understand why they were kicking her out, because she simply assumed that the sacred sign had moved somewhere else. Coco didn't understand why they were kicking her out, because she simply assumed that the sacred sign had moved somewhere else. She understood that it shouldn't be like this. She still wanted to meet her sister, so the girls urgently needed to come up with some kind of plan so that she wouldn't be kicked out like that. At that moment, the ability was activated. It was one of the abilities that the god of dogs gave her. She suggested that if Coco were checked now, perhaps the sacred sign would appear again. She knew that now she was different from the previous girl who lived with them. Since Coco was there now, something definitely had to change. She immediately told the maid about it so that it wouldn't drag on, but the maid replied that at the moment it would be very difficult to conduct a recheck. The Duke had already left on a business trip to the capital, and yet the appearance and disappearance of a sacred sign is a rather rare phenomenon. So, the renunciation of guardianship is postponed for now. She said that it was probably a great relief for the girl. Coco was glad that she wouldn't be kicked out right now. Then she would first like to meet her sister, and asked how she could cross paths with Lady Chloe. The maid replied that she could not meet with family members just like that. Perhaps if she can achieve great success, because among the servants there are children whom family members respect for their talent. Coco, of course, believed that she could do it, so she went directly to the family stable and found a special place where she could achieve the desired success. When she played with her sister in her past life, the best thing to play with was the ball. Coco immediately went to the place where they kept it, but looking inside, she saw a man there. Some elderly man said that since Sandra was dying, it was the end. If Mr. Roos found out, he would be furious. Opposite him stood a younger guy. He agreed with him and said that he did not understand what had happened at all, and how they now needed to correct this situation. He said that he doesn't eat hay or carrots, and if you come closer, a young guy tries to hit you. I've already lost count of how many servants suffered because of this. In fact, these people were talking about a large, thoroughbred black horse. The guy understood how Mr. Roos loved Sandra. However, they could not help but tie him up and cure him. He said that in this way, the animal would simply die of hunger. They needed to somehow bring this thoroughbred horse back to its senses so that they would not be scolded so harshly. All this irritated him very much. And in the end, the owner of the stable said that first they had to report to Mr. Roos. So together with Patrick, they got ready to go back to the estate. When Coco heard this name, she immediately remembered who he was. This is Roos Ardos, her little sister's younger brother. This guy was actually always very picky and knew how to let the wind out of his hands. She assumed that, most likely, as her sister loved Coco, so Roos loved his Sander. She also knew that when you are sick, it is very hard to go through all this, especially if you cannot help in any way. But then, suddenly, the girl in the corner saw the ball. He was still where she had hidden him. Of course, she was very happy about this. She believed that if she could throw him away well, she would achieve the desired success. Coco swung hard and threw the ball, and when she succeeded, she immediately began to scream loudly with joy and jump. The girl thought that now she would be able to meet her sister, but then, suddenly she heard a loud voice behind her. It belonged directly to Sandra. The horse called her a real fool and said that achieving success usually did not mean what she did. Cuckoo remembered her ability to talk to animals and asked what it meant then. Sander, seeing what she answered him, was very surprised and asked how she was able to hear his words at all. The girl replied that she heard his voice perfectly well and not his twitching. Because of this, Sander practically cried with happiness. He said that this little girl was not an idiot, but a real genius, so he asked her to help him. He said that he felt very unwell and had a strong splinter in his tongue, so he stuck his tongue out and showed it to her so that she could see for herself. When Coco saw her, she was shocked, after which she realized that she had to help and pulled this small splinter out of the Sander's tongue. She quickly stroked his soft head and asked if this meant that he didn't eat and tormented people just because of this splinter. The animal, who is now much better, said that everything is true. His precious body suffered so much all this long time, and those terrible veterinarians and grooms couldn't notice this splinter. He considered them to be real ignoramuses since they couldn't figure out the problem. Coco didn't understand why he was complaining. After all, it was he who didn't let them approach. But she didn't argue with him and said that since she had helped him, he would help her and tell her what it meant to achieve success. Sander, adjusting his beautiful silky mane, was surprised that she still did not know what success was. But he explained that success is not something that can be achieved simply by giving up something. He said that, for example, treating such a beautiful thoroughbred horse as he did was already a kind of success. Coco couldn't believe that she actually managed to succeed by simply pulling out a splinter. She asked if this was enough to meet her sister. At this moment, Patrick had already returned back to the stable. He did not understand why it was so noisy there, and also why the door was open, but as soon as he was inside, he saw a little girl who was gently stroking the horse's mane. He clearly remembered that he had set up a special barrier to prevent outsiders from entering, so he assumed that she was one of the family since she was able to do it. And besides, he didn't understand why such a thoroughbred horse was calm, considering that she was constantly pushing and screaming at everyone else. Patrick ran up to the girl and asked if she had calmed down this sensitive horse, and most importantly, how she had managed to do it. Kagogo gave her name, and she said that she really helped Sander recover. The guy immediately examined the horse from all sides and could not believe that his condition had really improved. Sander's eyes became clear, and his mane became incredibly smooth. This would certainly please Mr. Roos. Then he thought about how that very horse was cured by this little girl, whose name he had definitely heard somewhere, Coco. And then he remembered that it was a girl who had been taken in and was soon to be kicked out. And at the same time, the child, who was supposed to stay there for a very short time, did something that was worthy of praise. He was very happy about this. Smiling happily, Patrick said that it was necessary to immediately inform Mr. Rufus that it was he who cured this noble horse. Of course, Coco was shocked when she heard about this. She said that it was she who helped Sander, so she asked why he was saying completely different things. Patrick himself was happy because there was not a single piece of evidence that this girl helped the horse. So even if it wasn't him who helped Santor, however, he should have received the prize. He suddenly picked her up and asked what she was talking about. Maybe she just dreamed it all. He immediately asked how such a little girl could help such an animal like Sander. I took her out of the stable and put her on the ground and said that it was probably due to fatigue, and it would be better to return to my pavilion and get a good night's sleep. Coco asked him to stay. She wanted to say something else, but she didn't have time because the man went back in and closed the door behind him. Of course he didn't want to talk to her anymore. She did not understand how this could happen, because it was her merit. She tried very hard to cure this unfortunate animal. Well, Patrick was very happy. He wanted to meet Mr. Roos as soon as possible and was interested in how he would be rewarded. He immediately after this called the groom to the stable, examined the Sander, and was very amazed to see that the horse had really returned to an adequate state. He began to praise Patrick and was amazed that the man was able to cope in such a short time. The guy replied that it was very easy for him to do, and he was only happy to oblige. At that very moment, Mr. Roos burst into the room and immediately asked where his Sander was, because he had heard that his horse was now completely healthy. When the groom saw the gentleman, he was very surprised, because he had heard that the man was busy that day, so he did not expect to see him. Roos came closer to his horse and said that he could not concentrate on training after what he heard. Then he asked what ultimately happened to his horse. Patrick was a little worried. He said that he didn't know the name of the disease. However, Sander had a little indigestion. Because of this, he ate carrots worse than usual. Russ thought about it and said that it was very suspicious that just because of this, he did nothing. However, Patrick began to make excuses. He said that everything had changed, not only in food. He came up to Pet Sandra and said that now he listened to him much better. Well, of course the horse knew he was right, so he started to get indignant again and hit Patrick in the face with his hoof. Mr. Roos, having heard this, began to suspect all this even more. He said that his horse was clearly not obeying well. When Patrick started rubbing his blow, he said that before this, everything was completely fine. He did not understand why the horse began to behave like this now. It was really strange even for him. But at that moment, Sander suddenly jumped out of his fenced area and immediately spread his arms out to the sides to hug his favorite animal. He said that he apparently completely returned to normal. He said that he was incredibly worried about him, so he wanted to hug him. However, he suddenly walked past his owner and even went outside. He immediately turned to Sander and asked where he was going. Then he and his workers looked out of the stable to see where he had gone. The gentleman said that he had never been ignored like this before, even during his illness. It was all very strange to him, but as soon as he looked out into the street, he saw a little girl whom Sander Coco had just approached. When she saw him, she was very happy and ran to meet him. She immediately hugged the horse and said that she was very happy that he was no longer sick. For her, this is truly the greatest joy. Roos looked at this little girl in surprise and asked why Sander was so affectionate with her, considering the fact that he ignored everyone and even hit Patrick. Patrick immediately screamed. He said that he didn't know why this was happening. Whoever it was still necessary to take this unfamiliar girl away. He believed that she could even be dangerous. However, Coco, upon hearing this, immediately ran up to them and said that she still had something to say. She introduced herself and stated that in fact it was she who cured Sander. Roos, hearing this name, wondered why it was so familiar to him. Patrick, meanwhile, began to argue with the child and, in an indignant voice, asked why she began to lie so brazenly. The girl screamed at him in response and replied that it was not a spoon. She even had proof. Then she showed a splinter that she pulled out of the horse's tongue. All the men immediately looked at this. When the Russian saw it, he immediately understood what exactly it meant. In fact, sometime before this, Coco was upset when the door was closed in front of her, and she was not even allowed to say anything. She did not know what to do. Patrick could easily take credit for her achievement in order to meet his sister. She could not miss such a feat, so she thought for a long time about what she would ultimately do. And then an idea came to her mind. While she was still in the stable, she asked Sander where he got this splinter from. The horse explained that it was all Russian. He had been studying abroad for 10 years, and Sander had gone with him, and a week ago they had just returned. Before leaving, he went to the field and decided to eat these beautiful flowers one last time. And then, this terrible splinter stuck into his tongue. It was a flower that grew only there, so when they returned, the local guys couldn't even hear about it and didn't understand what had happened. So when Coco had a chance to explain all this to the horse's owner, she told a fascinating story and explained that it was evidence of a splinter flower that did not grow in their area. Roos, having heard all this, thought about it, looked at this thorn even more closely, and realized that no flowers really had such blue thorns. Then he realized that Sander had become ill on the way to the capital, and therefore the time also coincided perfectly. Then he realized that all this was not due to the jam at all, but that this splinter was to blame. At that moment, the groom approached the Sander and examined him. He said that the girl was right. It was the splinter's fault, because there was even a trace of it left there. Besides, the groom said that how could one not look at all this? The atmosphere was as if Baby had really cured Sandra, because he treated her very politely and even went there himself. Roos, noticing this, said that it really was, but he had never even approached his master so close. He then looked at Patrick and said that this meant that he was trying to take credit for someone else's work. The man understood that he would now face consequences for this, so he got down on his knees and began to ask for forgiveness. He said that he really was wrong. It was because of greed that he just wanted to get recognition. The man began to ask for forgiveness many times. He really understood that the punishment could be very serious. Coco also watched what was happening. She realized that Uniduke Roos, when he was angry, scared her a little. And besides, because of her, he scolded Patrick a lot. Of course, she was very sorry. However, she could not do anything about it. Coco, even if she becomes a bad dog, she was definitely going to meet her sister. Otherwise, nothing would have worked out for her. The man continued to ask the gentleman for forgiveness, but he interrupted him. Roos interrupted him and said that he was making too much noise. Then he turned to the girl and asked who she was. Was she really a servant or a veterinarian? But the girl didn't have time to answer because the horse started talking. He asked for forgiveness for interrupting the conversation. However, he said that this was the baby, the youngest daughter of this family. The guy, hearing about this, immediately panicked and asked in a trembling voice, "Is this really the youngest daughter?" He couldn't believe that while he was studying abroad all this time, they had already had another child. But the man explained that this was not so. The baby was adopted after a divine revelation. When the guy heard this, he immediately calmed down because he had already heard something similar when he was still studying. Then he approached Coco and asked if this meant that, technically, she was now his younger sister. But the girl shook her head in different directions and said that this was not the case. Ruth asked why she thought so, and the girl explained that she had not received the sacred sign, so she would soon be kicked out because of this. But she was able to achieve success that day and asked if it was really so. The Russian saw her courage and persistence and immediately smiled. He said that this is how she saved Sonder because she was afraid that she would be kicked out of the family. She was apparently a little smart, as he understood. However, he still did not have the authority to leave her, so he could not fulfill her wish. But Coco protested. She said that this was not what she wanted at all. She had heard that if she achieved great success, she could meet family members. She looked at him with a pleading look and asked him to let her meet Lady Chloe. The man was very surprised to hear about his system. He couldn't believe that this little girl actually wanted to meet the dangerous Chloe, about whom there were many terrible rumors. Chloe herself, meanwhile, was constantly in her room. She was depressed and missed her Coco incredibly much, and therefore could not do anything about it. In fact, when Roos returned and met his sister, he saw what a terrible state she was in. Her mana core was already more than half destroyed. These were the symptoms of an uncontrolled release of power. He was very worried about her, but Chloe didn't understand why he cared. She didn't want anyone to worry about her. The man, of course, got angry. He said that he was her brother, so it was quite natural that he was worried about her health. But Chloe didn't even want to listen to him then. She simply told him to leave while she asked nicely. And that's why now it was difficult for the man to imagine why the girl wanted to meet with her. After the puppy's death, she became even more unbearable. Even if baby saved Sander, he cannot allow her to meet Chloe while she was in such a state. Therefore, the man said that she must have another desire, because it is very dangerous for her to meet with the current Chloe. But Coco protested and said that Lady Chloe is not a dangerous person at all, and she did not want anything else, only this. She began to ask the Russian to allow her to meet with her. For her, this was really very important. And the man, of course, was amazed because he did not understand how much she wanted this. After the whole situation was resolved, he went back to the estate, followed by the groom, who was also his assistant. Roos said that he absolutely did not understand this girl, why she was rushing to certain death. He offered her toys and money, but she refused everything. The assistant smiled and said that until the baby herself says it, they won't know. However, perhaps Mrs. Chloe and the baby could even become friends, in his opinion. When Roos heard this, he was immediately very surprised. He said that it was all somehow strange. Chloe and this little girl were definitely not alike, but his assistant began to defend his own. He said that it was her warm look when she looked at animals that was very similar to the look of this little girl when she stroked Sandor. Eventually, after some time, Coco finally received that very document which contained permission for Chloe to visit. The girl did not waste time and immediately went there. She was happy because the first stage of the plan to become a sister was successfully completed. In fact, she even picked a lot of fresh flowers in advance. After all, she loves them a lot like Chloe, so she told the maid to go quickly because she really wanted to meet her. But the maid was very uneasy about all this. She asked why the little girl was going to Mrs. Chloe's separate pavilion. She was so ugly, so the woman did not understand at all why she decided to do this. But Coco ignored her question because she understood that she wouldn't be able to prove anything anyway. She saw a small building not far from the mansion and asked what it was anyway. The maid immediately replied that it was a grave for Mrs. Chloe's dog. The flower girl maids looked after it day and night according to her orders. When Coco heard this, she immediately realized that it was a grave. Of course, she was very pleased that her sister remembered her. She never forgot. It was really important to her. The maid also said that some people say that her dog's life was better. However, the woman did not understand why she built such a large grave for some old dog. Coco, of course, was indignant. She said that it was a very kind puppy and not old at all, but the maid replied that this was not so. Some say that the dog died when she was over 15. If we translate it into human age, the dog was already a grandmother. Of course, Coco didn't expect to hear this because she felt like a puppy and never felt this weight of age as one might think. She refused to believe that she was old, so she began to prove to the maid that she was a very kind and sweet puppy. The maid understood that it was better not to argue with the child, so she agreed. After that, they reached the entrance to the palace, and the maid asked for forgiveness, saying that she could not go further. Cuckoo looked at her in surprise and asked why this was so, but the maid explained that Mrs. Chloe's mansion was in semi-confinement. Therefore, many extra people who received permission could enter there. The girl replied that she understood everything, although she was a little upset that now she had to go alone. She went inside and was about to go quickly to her little sister's room. But as soon as she opened the door, another maid met her there. This girl did not look friendly. She turned to Coco and asked who she was and, most importantly, why she came to this mansion. The girl immediately introduced herself and asked who the woman was. At the same time, she handed her permission to let her through. It was the lady's personal maid, Chloe, who, having studied this permission, asked for forgiveness, but said that at the moment, the lady was meeting with a very important guest. The maid replied that she would pass on her words. However, perhaps she still would not be able to meet with her precisely because of this. But this was not enough for Coco, so she said that she could wait a little if necessary. The maid replied that she did not know exactly how long she would have to wait. Perhaps it could take a very long time. The girl said that it was not a problem for her to wait. She certainly knew how, so the maid took her to another room so that she would not have to stand on the threshold. In fact, every time her sister went outside, Coco always waited for her at the door. And every time she returned, she hugged her and kissed her. That's why this time, Coco knew that if she gave it to her, her sister would come to her and they would finally be able to meet after so many years of separation. A lot of time has passed since then, and Coco was even given a special cup of tea and dessert. She had already managed to drink it all, but there was still some left and she was waiting for her sister. The maids who passed by her room were amazed that this girl still hadn't left. They didn't understand why she came being so annoying and what she wanted from her mistress. At that moment, Coco became very upset. She then realized that her sister would definitely not come. But before, if she waited, she always came, and because of this, she became even sadder. She thought about the fact that perhaps all this was happening this way because she became human. However, this could not continue in her opinion. In that case, she was going to go to her little sister on her own. Since she did not want to go, she really had serious intentions of becoming friends with Chloe again. So Coco needed to come up with a new plan on how she could meet her as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in the living room, Chloe was indeed receiving one guest. It was Madame Teresa, and the maids who helped her receive the guest were very delighted with this woman. Even in the presence of their mistress, they whispered to each other. One of the maids said that some were saying that this time the mistress had come to help Chloe. Another girl replied that every time she saw them together, she thought about how they could be so different. But the abilities correspond to the character, so it is not surprising that Miss Chloe also possessed darkness and looked the same. The same could not be said about Mrs. Teresa, who looked like an angel and was also Chloe's sister. The girl approached her and said that she knew that she was deliberately spreading various rumors about her and making sure that they reached Chloe directly. That's why she asked her sister not to bother her with her ridiculous nonsense and finally start living her own life. But Teresia smiled and said that it was because she still lived like a recluse, as befitted a dark sorceress on the verge of madness. The girl told her sister not to be like that, because Teresia, on the contrary, wanted to help her, she said. As you know, there is a whole... She also asked, "You don't think that you and I are equally gifted, of course?" Chloe didn't think so, because she knew that all the people on the continent were divided into two groups. The first group were the gifted, those who received God's blessing and used their abilities. But the vast majority of ordinary people did not have this. The gifted constituted less than 1% of the population of the late empire, so each of them was a precious asset, and among them, the most valuable was the healing power, which was based on the ability of light. Chloe's sister smiled and said that her healing power certainly didn't match hers. However, her cleansing power could also heal the sick. Thanks to this, she became a candidate for the saints of this generation. In general, it seemed to her that because of Chloe's darkness, the mansion had become very gloomy. She would really like to help her sister and dispel her feelings with her own, but Chloe was very categorical about this. The girl told her in a very rude voice not to even try. Her cleansing power would not work on her magical output anyway, But then she suddenly suggested her very plausible theory and asked if the girl really wanted to just cure her in this way and get recognition from her father. Chloe said that if she wanted to be recognized as the heir, she should have done her own thing and not pestered Chloe. Teresia was very angry when she heard this. She could not believe that the girl ignored her just because she was not her father's biological daughter. She even thought that even without this direct lineage of theirs, she would still be recognized as a candidate for sainthood. But the girl tried to calm down, because she was not allowed to show her weaknesses among the maids. She tried to sound very calm, and told Chloe that she had no idea what she was talking about. She decided to prick her and said that at least she didn't act stupid like Chloe, sitting and mourning for a whole year some dead dog like her sister. In her opinion, it was completely unreasonable and stupid. Chloe couldn't stand this kind of treatment any longer. She slammed her hand on the table and said, "You, girl, have already stopped all this." At that moment, her magic suddenly began to develop around her. She said that it was already difficult for her to endure all this, so she advised her sister to just leave. When Teresia saw the purple lights around her sister's hand, she immediately became worried and wondered if the girl was really going to use her evil magic on her. Chloe then smiled evilly and asked her what happened. Even if she went mad, the girl would still be able to heal her, so she didn't worry about anything. But then she said mockingly that most likely the girl would not be able to do it after all. That is why she panicked so much. Teresia didn't understand how she even dared to threaten her with her power. After all, she had been looking after her for so long, and the girl ended up treating her like this. However, seeing the frightened expressions on the servants' faces, she realized that this situation actually played into her hands. So, laughing, the girl said that she understood everything. Her anxiety was unpleasant for Chloe, so she ultimately decided to leave, because she assumed that her sister was not feeling well, so it would be better for everyone. The girl herself thought that a girl like Chloe could only become a stain on the Duke's reputation, and if she decided to do so, it would not be difficult for her to get rid of her. After that, the girl simply left and closed the door behind her. At that moment, Chloe was clearly unwell. She stopped trying to use her magic so much that she even started coughing a lot. Finally, the girl looked at her hand and saw blood there. I wiped it from my face, and she realized that her body was practically unable to cope with such a large amount of magic. Chloe also thought that if Teresa knew how she felt a year ago, she definitely wouldn't have said that. Over the past year, everyone has been constantly pestering her, saying that she always wanted to become the heir to the duchy and receive recognition from her father. But they did not understand why she suddenly decided to give up all this. But a year ago, when they began to bury her closest beloved pet in the ground, her heart broke into pieces. The girl screamed at the people who were burying her and asked them to stop. She said that this child was her precious family, so they couldn't treat Coco like that. However, her father did not understand such a reaction. He said that she could not make such a fuss over just one dog. It was definitely wrong of her. When the girl heard such words from her father, she could not believe that he actually said such a thing, because Coco was not just a dog for her. It was the creature that first loved her as she was, the only friend who turned her world upside down, and also the family that Chloe wanted to protect more than anything in the world. And of course, her rescue with Coco, she could feel like herself and not be ashamed of it. Ultimately, after a year of their separation, the girl did not get better, and she assumed that perhaps others were telling the truth, and she really had gone crazy. However, despite their separation, Chloe continued to desperately search for traces of her presence in the estate. For example, she found Coco's favorite toy, her footprints on the floor, as well as bowls in which the dog hid her food. She always remembered that Coco was waiting for her in front of the door when she returned from a walk, and now that this did not happen, it was the hardest thing for her. Chloe felt that it would be better for her to die than to experience such feelings. She could not cope with this loss. The girl even thought that after death she would be able to see Coco, so she spent a lot of time thinking about the fact that perhaps she could realize her death a little faster than when fate had prepared for her to do so. And after this terrible meeting with her sister, she, lying in bed, suddenly felt a familiar smell. The girl approached the door and saw a small flower lying on the floor. Of course she recognized it. Chloe quickly picked it up and was sure that this was the flower that Coco brought for her every morning. This made the girl feel incredibly hurt. She became very angry and assumed that it was all the work of the vile Teresa, who decided to play with her feelings. She told no one to approach her bedroom, so she didn't understand who dared to obey her and took it so brazenly, leaving this flower behind. But in fact, it was Coco who did it. She believed that if she couldn't meet her sister in person, she wanted to at least leave something of herself there. She thought that sneaking around her sister's room was like eating a sweet potato. Since she left the flower, the girl thought that Chloe would understand that it was Coco. She was sitting in the same room where the maid left her. And then suddenly, after some time, the maid came to her and asked the little girl if she had accidentally gone somewhere else. The maid explained that some say that the flower she brought with her was found near Mistress Chloe's room. The girl smiled happily and was very proud of herself. She immediately said that it was she who put it there and asked if Chloe had found it yet. Then, suddenly the maid raised her voice at her and asked why she did it. She said that it was absolutely not the right time for such a thing. The maid said that Mistress Chloe was very angry because she left the flower there. If she went mad because of this, she could be absorbed by dark energy, and after that, she would simply die. Coco didn't understand what nonsense she was talking about, because her sister really loved purple flowers. She even thought about the fact that maybe she should give her a delicious sweet potato as a reward. It could lift her spirits. But the maid suddenly said that the mistress had ordered the criminals to be brought to her room immediately. The girl, of course, decided that this was her chance. This meant that Coco would actually be able to meet with Mistress Chloe. She started jumping for joy, and the maid watched all this in surprise because she didn't understand why the girl was so happy. But the girl was proud of herself. She considered herself a real genius and knew that now her goal had been achieved. And so, after some time, she finally went up to Chloe's room. However, for some reason, she was not there. The maid explained that Mistress Chloe had already arrived in another room, so the girls had to wait a while. Coco didn't mind. However, when she entered the room, she didn't understand why everything was so gloomy. She felt very uneasy because she knew that her sister never liked the dark, so all this was very strange. When some time had passed since then, Chloe finally finished her dinner. She returned to the room, and the maid told her that the baby was waiting for her inside. The lady thought that the criminal who brought the flower was an adopted girl who would soon be kicked out, so she thought that she needed to be found as soon as possible. But the girl didn't understand why this child needed to come to such a remote pavilion. At some point, Chloe even thought that the girl had run away without waiting for her. However, as soon as she opened the door to her room, she was immediately blinded by the bright sun. She could not believe that the servants had treated her this way, but Chloe quickly dismissed this option because, on the contrary, they always kept them curtained to create an oppressive and gloomy atmosphere. Then, she seriously began to wonder who could have done this. She went inside and noticed a flower in a vase on a small table and also a note. This letter said that some people say that bells drive evil away far, far away. When Chloe read it, she noticed that the handwriting was simply disgusting. She was wondering who did all this. Then suddenly, Chloe heard a very familiar sound behind her. She turned her head to the side in the hope that she would see Coco, but when she turned back, she saw only a little girl who was sleeping on the floor, curled up in a ball and constantly licking her lips in her sleep, just like her dog did. Then Chloe immediately realized that the maid was talking about the fact that this was an adopted girl, so it couldn't be Coco. She didn't understand what kind of stupid thoughts she had at all, so she went up to this little girl and woke her up. Coco slowly opened her eyes, rubbing her hand over her class, turned to her sister, and asked if it was really her. When Chloe looked at this girl, she saw so many different habits from her dog. She did not understand what was happening and why she had a strange feeling inside. She also felt like her heart was about to jump out of her chest. At that moment, Coco practically jumped up on the bed and, seeing her sister, she smiled happily. When the girl saw her surprised expression, she lowered her head and became a little upset. She realized that the girl apparently did not recognize her at all, and yet she was still happy because she was finally able to meet her little sister. Chloe continued to find this whole situation incredibly strange. She didn't understand why the girl was looking at her, the one she had never seen in her life, with such a welcoming look. Besides, she didn't understand why her heart fluttered so much when she looked at this girl. After all, they had never seen each other before, and, in general, she should have scolded her for this terrible act with the flower. Eventually, Chloe asked who this girl was, and Coco immediately gave her name. The woman then suddenly remembered that this was the name of the girl who was adopted, but she did not understand why, as luck would have it. she had the same name as her dear dog. She sighed heavily and asked if it was really she who left the flower under the door. Then she explained that it was very impolite to enter someone else's room and leave things there. Coco was very upset when she heard her sister call this room a stranger. She realized that her sister really didn't recognize her, but the girl decided not to be upset. She had already decided that she would get to know her again, and this time she was going to take the first step towards her. So the girl smiled and said that she did it because she wanted to be friends with precious Lady Chloe. The lady certainly didn't expect to hear something like this. She asked, "Do you think I'll believe such nonsense that you want to make friends? It's probably because you'll soon be kicked out." Coco protested. She said that it was all wrong. She just wanted to know more about Lady Chloe's dark magic. She heard that it was incredibly great magic. In fact, she definitely wanted to tell the girl something when she met her new one. After all, she still didn't understand why people only said bad things about her. In fact, when Coco was still in the form of a dog, she was always angry at those people who accused Chloe of all the evil deeds and considered her evil. Chloe didn't understand why people hated her so much. This included people close to her fiancé, and father. They say that her mother died very early, precisely because of her, and all because she was a dark sorceress. At one point, Chloe even thought about the fact that she really could ruin everything. In fact, because people hated Coco's sister, she was alone for so long. But when she was a puppy, she could only bark. But now, the girl was a human and she could talk. That's why she was going to support him. Coco didn't understand what was so special about this gloomy dark sorceress. She believed that everything that shines is due to the stars. Since Coco could now speak normally, she was going to tell her little sister how wonderful she was. The girl smiled and said that the stars are all in the sky during the day, but they can only be seen on a dark night. If you didn't exist in their world at night, they wouldn't know how beautiful the stars are. So Coco believed that everyone loves the stars precisely because of the darkness. The girl spread her arms to hug Chloe and said that this was why she liked Lady's dark magic more than the light. Chloe, of course, didn't believe her. She said that darkness was just darkness. It couldn't be more beautiful than light. She considered it nonsense and activated her magical abilities to scare the girl and drive her away. But Coco had a different reaction. She said that she felt as if she were in Lady Chloe's arms. The night sky spread out, and it seemed to her that both the stars and the moon were sleeping in the darkness of Lady Chloe. The girl didn't understand what she was saying at all, and also why she wasn't scared. All of this was very strange. She thought it was a little girl who seemed about to be swallowed up by my darkness, and suddenly, as if shrouded in starlight, began to approach me. Coco said in a joyful voice that she was not afraid at all. She also asked Lady Chloe if she was not tired of her. Then maybe in the future they would spend time together like this, because she had a lot of fun. She said that she was now very healthy, and although she was still quite awkward, she could definitely move well now. Coco was absolutely sure that she would be able to make her sister smile again, so she asked Chloe if she could come visit her at least sometimes. Chloe eventually heard this anger and said that sometimes of course she could come, but she had one more condition for this. The girl said not to call her sister. It didn't matter whether they adopted her into their family or not. She wasn't her sister. Chloe explained that she only considered one person in her family, and that definitely didn't include the little girl Coco. She also said that even if she came to her separate pavilion, she should not bother her. And if she came, she could simply disappear unnoticed. Of course, Coco promised and returned. However, she was very worried about this terrible loneliness of her little sister. She felt a thick smell of loneliness from her sister. She didn't even have the fluffy pillow that her sister gave her, not her warm embrace. Coco was also now completely alone, but the girl was not going to be upset when she was homeless, and often slept on the cold ground. Therefore, the fact that she was now shivering from the cold was only because a cold wind blew a little into her heart. But this did not mean that it was frozen forever. She hadn't been kicked out of the sister's house after all, so she knew that now they would be able to see each other more than once. Coco wasn't going to be upset about a small setback. She knew that she just had to try really hard, and then her sister would start smiling just as brightly again like before. The next day, early in the morning, she first of all went to Chloe. She dressed very beautifully and was going to go to her in order to have a good time. However, when the girl walked along the corridors, she suddenly saw how many different mice suddenly began to run past her. She saw them and immediately frowned. But one of the mice looked at this big girl and said that she was that puppy Coco. I was very surprised that she could talk to mice, But one of the mice asked, "Haven't you received the blessing of the god of dogs?" If that's the case, then of course she could do it without any problem. Then the mouse suddenly introduced himself as the emperor of mice, or even as a king. He said that the god of dogs called them, who were in a separate pavilion, and they came to this place. Coco was very surprised to hear this. She immediately asked why he didn't come himself but sent mice to this place. The Mouse King replied that he was the god of dogs, so it was clear that he had many different things to do, and he simply could not do something like that. After that, he said that he received a special mission from the god of dogs, which turned out to be a divine message, saying that the time had come to see Coco's future. Then the girl remembered that, in fact, before going to Earth, the god of dogs mentioned something similar. He gave her the gift of prophecy, thanks to which she could see the future. He said that this ability is very important. So Coco, smiling happily, told the Mouse King to show her this future as soon as possible. Then the king said that before this, he had one warning that she should hear. He said that you can see the future only once, and only what is connected with your sister. So she had to look carefully and remember everything well. Coco immediately said that she would be able to remember everything. She was absolutely sure of it, especially since it concerned her sister. Then, King Moselle said that she was ready, and asked her to close her eyes, and then he would convey to her the blessing of God. The girl immediately did just that. After this, many rays of light poured into her head, and they were about to show her her sister's future. In the future, Lady Chloe will intend to hurt and slander. This, of course, was very bad. She will be persecuted and accused of crimes that she did not commit. After this, her father will expel Chloe from the duchy. And after this, she will be executed. When the girl saw all these prophecies, she was very shocked. She immediately burst into tears, because the girl certainly did not expect to see such a thing. Seeing her reaction, the Mouse King immediately asked what she saw there. But the girl did not know what she was doing, that her sister could die, and because of this she was so worried. The Mouse King immediately screamed and asked if she really saw a future in which she couldn't save her sister. The girl, wiping away her tears, said that everything was exactly like that. However, Coco replied that there was nothing wrong with that as long as she was looking at the future. Her friends from the Dog Star told her something else. They, of course, encouraged the girl and said that what she saw was a future that had not yet arrived, so she could easily change all of this with us. Coco was happy to hear that she could really change all this so that her sister would not die. The Mouse King was sincerely happy for her and said that it was really very excellent. But then he suddenly thought about it and said, "Then we need to act quickly." He didn't know the reason, but in his opinion, this annoying owner of the house was going to close the mansion for a while. And besides, the maids of this mansion can certainly isolate the mistress, and they themselves put the money in their pockets. The Mouse King thought about this seriously and said that her sister was probably very lonely and unhappy now. Coco agreed with him. She was very angry at these terrible maids who had absolutely no right to act like this. In the future, which the girl saw, her sister was very unhappy, but this time everything was supposed to be different. The people who torment her sister the most in the present are her stepmother Licorice and her half-sister Teresia. The girl, of course, could not do anything to them now. However, she could punish the maids and butler whom they sent to commit atrocities. Coco considered herself a very resourceful puppy. After all, when it came to her sister, she became very smart, so the girl decided not to worry. She just acted on her instincts. She certainly wasn't going to be upset, and definitely wanted to be friends with her sister, and she simply had to destroy these people who looked like rotten sweet potatoes. When the Mouse King heard all these words, he said that after she looked into the future, the girl suddenly became very smart, and said that this was certainly true, and she even gained courage from there. Coco also added that in the future she saw, the maids hid the embezzled money in a book called the Treasury Book. The girl believed that if they found her, she would be able to track down the maids as well. Of course, it would be very difficult for her to get to that book herself, so she told the Mouse King that she could tell him about the secret passage and would give him the cheese. And in return, she would like him to fulfill her request. The Mouse King immediately began to praise himself and said that he certainly would not agree to a bribe. However, this time he would help her out of the kindness of his heart. After they discussed all the details of the plan, they went outside and the Mouse Emperor asked if the girl was ready to carry out their plan. Coco agreed, but before that, she was going to repeat everything again so that he wouldn't forget anything. This wonderful Mouse King, along with the other mice, had to split into 2 teams and look for the book and her old toys. Everything was exactly like this. They had to give one of the toys to Coco. With its help, she would receive permission to enter this place. The Mouse King, repeating this plan, said that he remembered everything and also admired her courage, because he heard that she planned to carry out her part of the plan at night. The indignant girl said that these maids keep the embezzled money in a book. That day she will force them to show her the crime scene, so that they cannot deny anything. After they discussed everything, the mouse set off on his mission. Coco advised him to be careful, and she herself realized that the first stage of the operation to save her sister had begun. Then her mission to get rid of the maids began, and some time passed from that moment until the maid came to the mistress. The maid told Chloe that the little girl had also come that day, asking permission to have lunch with her mistress and asking what the girl thought about it. The girl replied that she had already eaten, so she asked the maid to tell her to leave. The maid immediately went to Coco. When she returned to the girl, she told the little one to go away and not bother the mistress anymore. After the maid returned, she wished the mistress a bon appetit and said that she would stay nearby for a while. But Chloe said that the fact that they wished her bon appetit was too much, considering that the food they served was terribly spoiled. She sighed heavily and said that due to the side effects of the release, she didn't even feel the taste, and they actually served her some leftovers. It was soon to be the anniversary of her dog Coco's death, so she decided not to make a scene because she was already feeling bad, and she didn't want any unnecessary showdowns. Ordinary life after Coco's departure was so tiring for her that she eventually put her food aside and thought about everything. But at that moment, the girl suddenly managed to break through to Lady Chloe. She had already run up to her and wanted to say something, but didn't have time. The girl, seeing the baby, immediately asked why she had come again. Coco handed her a small ball and said that she had come precisely because of this. The girls thought that this thing was for Lady Chloe, so she brought it in order to return it. The woman was very surprised when she saw this ball. In fact, it was Coco's favorite toy. She thought that she had lost it forever. However, now it was in front of her. Coco explained that she had just seen mice carrying away toys. The woman, upon hearing this, immediately asked if this meant that there were other toys as well. The little girl nodded her head in agreement and said that the mice had taken it all away and hidden it. She also added that she could catch mice quite well, and they had a lot of them on their estate. Chloe suddenly grabbed her head. She really didn't like that the girl was pressing on her so hard, but she asked what she meant by that. She took advantage of this opportunity and asked the lady if she could spend the night in this place. She explained that mice mostly appear at night, so this way she would be able to find other toys that they had hidden. Of course, Chloe, upon hearing this, thought that it was all nonsense. However, if Coco's favorite toys were somewhere, she would be able to find traces that she didn't even know about. So I take the ball away from the little girl. She said that she agreed to these conditions, but warned that this could only happen on this day, and that she had to catch all these mice after finding the toys. The girl was very glad that she was allowed. She said that she would definitely catch everyone, after which she apologized for disturbing her. She also added that she would like to stay in this dining room for a while. The girl then looked at this terrible food and even walked away from it, after which she opened the curtains again to let sunlight into this room. Chloe, standing to the side, simply watched what was happening. That same night, the mice reported to the girl that the book was in the food storage room in the basement. So Coco went to the place that the mice had talked about, and she finally found it and succeeded in penetrating. She knew that if she walked a little further, she would finally be able to get what she needed. However, Coco suddenly heard the maids talking. One of the hospital mountains said that this time the punishment was quite lenient. She locked Chloe in the room to save money. Her partner suddenly laughed and asked what kind of method it was, because she had always been successful in business, so she could definitely handle this task with ease. Coco, hearing all this, was incredibly angry. At that moment, she wanted to tear these maids into small pieces. However, for the sake of her sister, she had to at least endure a little, so she and the mice developed a special plan to drive away the evil maids without anyone knowing that Coco had entered the basement. When the girl found herself in the right place, just as the mice had said, a very suspicious smell was emanating from there, which even made her a little wary. She was sure that it was the smell of food and bad thoughts when she entered a special room in which many different barrels and boxes were stored, This smell only intensified. Then, she finally saw that under the blanket that covered some of the boxes, the smell was the strongest. And now, she was finally able to find the necessary book of evil maids. Coco was happy because now she could drive out these maids in front of her sister. She was going to put it in her dress pocket and just leave so that no one would see her there. But then suddenly, when the girl was about to leave, she heard the voice of some servant who began to approach the door and said that she heard some sound in the room. Then, soon after that, the door opened. They did not understand why the mice were making so much noise. The other maid did not understand what she was talking about because she did not hear anything. The girls looked around the room and assumed that perhaps she was just imagining things. But just in case, they decided to check everything, while Coco was hiding behind the boxes. The girl was a little scared, but at that moment, she began to pray to the god of dogs and really hoped that everything would go well. But at that moment, one of the maids came up to her and grabbed her by the dress and said that she had finally found their little mouse. She said that the little girl had hidden very well, but then added that her partner should go and immediately bring the head maid, because they needed to discuss what to do with this girl. Then Coco realized that she was seriously in trouble. She had been caught by those evil maids, but she also couldn't let them realize that she had found their book and was planning some kind of plan. But the other girl said that this is all. It's not surprising, she thought. Why did this girl who was constantly running so noisily suddenly disappear? She threw the cocoa on the ground, and it was quite rude. Immediately after that, the head maid came to them. She turned to the little girl and said that she should have been taught that good children go to bed early. After that, she asked the girl to tell everything as it was, what she saw and what she heard in this place. Otherwise, she would definitely be in trouble. She also said that if the girl did not confess, she would report it to the Duchess and she would be immediately kicked out of the estate. Coco tried to stay calm. She consoled herself with the thought that no one could kick her out after that. She told the maid about it and said that she had already achieved success, and she came to this place in order to find a squeaky toy that the Duchess asked her to find. Of course, the girl had prepared a plan in advance in case of her exposure so that she would be calm. The main maid looked at her in surprise and asked if she really went down to this basement to find some kind of dog toy. Of course, she didn't believe her, so she continued to insist on her own, but Coco reminded her again that it was Ms. Chloe who asked her to find it, so she followed her orders. At that very moment, the head maid already wanted to say something, but did not have time because Mistress Chloe appeared behind her and, turning to them all, she asked what they were doing there anyway. The girl immediately rejoiced when she saw her little sister. She ran up to her and wanted to hug her, but the other maids were very surprised and did not understand how the mistress even decided to come to this place. In fact, not long before this, Coco warned the lady that she would go look for a toy and also added that if she goes, she asked if she should immediately go to her room. The girl thought that since it was already late, there was probably a chance that they would spend the night together. But Chloe said that when she found the toy, she had to shout, "Squeaky toy!" in the same place. When the girl explained that she would come for her wherever the girl was, and when Coco saw her little sister in front of her, she was amazed. She could not believe that the woman had really come, but the girl handed her her toy and said that she was able to find what she was asked for. The maid already wanted to say something, but Chloe asked them to stand silently. She thanked Coco and said that she was a good girl, and after that, she took the toy from her. Then Coco suddenly raised her hand up and said that she had found something else. It was a very suspicious book. There was some strange word written in it that she didn't even know about, so the Duchess held it out. The woman took the book from her and said that they would talk about it later. First, she asked the girl herself to go upstairs. After that, she looked at the maids with an incredibly angry look and told them to go after her in the meantime. She took them to another room in the basement, and after examining this book, asked the maids if they had fun gathering in the basement every night and plotting against their mistress. She asked if they really thought that she would never know anything about them. The main thing the maid didn't understand was why Chloe was behaving this way. After all, she had never paid attention to it before, so it was very strange. The woman decided to act carefully. She asked why the girl suddenly decided to take up this issue so abruptly, since some say that she already knew everything. Chloe said that of course it was exactly like that. She knew everything perfectly well, but she didn't care. However, they definitely shouldn't have touched the child, so now they had to pay for their behavior. The maids couldn't believe that she decided to punish them because of some commoner she didn't even know. The main thing is that the maid thought that she didn't care about this girl. However, she realized that she was apparently very wrong. She didn't care at all about this because she was carrying out another order that was from Teresia. She said that the maids should keep an eye on Chloe because it would be better if they could still capture this mansion. The main thing is that the maid was the Duchess of Locriaci's person from the very beginning, so she believed that Chloe definitely couldn't do anything to her, so she wasn't even afraid of her. Therefore, smiling, she told the lady that it was time for her to go. After all, as she knows, punishing maids is the right of the mistress of the house. Therefore, she will receive punishment personally from the Duchess. The main thing is that the maid believed that if she continues to sit like this, the Duchess will definitely not reward her. She did not have the slightest chance of victory. But at that moment, Chloe suddenly smiled and said that she apparently still hadn't learned the family charter about members of the direct family line being able to use their abilities to individually punish servants. At that moment, she activated her abilities and said that she would make their fears, which they feared most of all in the world, appear before them. At that moment, she immediately did it, and the maids screamed loudly because they certainly did not expect this. At first, it will be simply dark for them, but soon their horror will materialize in this impenetrable darkness, so Chloe wanted to watch them desperately flounder until the morning, although perhaps she can spare them and stop this suffering a little earlier. The maids immediately fell to the ground. They saw nothing and asked for help. Some of the maids even apologized to her and said that they were wrong. After it was all over, Chloe came out of the basement, actually. Normally, she would have just punished them and let them go. But since it was the little girl who helped her find Coco's toy, she thought that the punishment she had come up with for them was not even that cruel. The girls now needed to hire a new maid with a clean past. But then suddenly, when she started to climb the stairs, she suddenly felt very dizzy and she almost fell. Luckily, Chloe managed to grab the wall. She used her abilities too much, and again she got that terrible side effect that she hated the most. This side effect of dark magic was called the illusion that she kept hearing the barking of her beloved Coco. I continue to create an illusion from happy memories. However, when these people disappeared, an endless and enormous pain came that consumed Chloe's body and her consciousness. The girl fell to the ground and burst into tears because those terrible memories really appeared before her. But then suddenly, after some time, she felt how quickly her pain passed. It was very surprising. She didn't understand why she ran out of side effects so quickly. It was very strange, but in the end, she went back to her room and decided to rest a little. At the same time, she conveyed to the little girl through the night that the girl could spend the night with her that day. Then Coco realized that this meant that Chloe did not want to see her, since she conveyed this through the night. The girl sighed heavily when she realized that she would not come, and was a little upset about it. But in the end, she could not count on it, so she decided not to be too sad. At that moment, the knight suddenly took out a small bottle for her and said that Lady Chloe had not thrown away the medicine after all, but had handed it over and asked if the girl had hurt herself when she fell. Of course, Coco said that she was hurt, but she didn't expect that anyone could notice it. Then she realized that Chloe had a pretty keen eye since she managed to do it after all. Then the man applied a special medicine to her, and the girl saw that it healed early and was pleasantly surprised. She realized that it must have been a very precious thing. The man agreed and said that this was a very precious medicine. Chloe told the girl to definitely use it. Coco immediately laughed and was pleasantly surprised. She decided that she could do without sweet potatoes, and stroking her sister because her sister remained the same. She was like the warm sun that could not bear the wounds on her body. Coco thought that someday again the day would come when she would say that they love their what more than anything in the world. So, on this day, the girl was ready to do all the unpleasant things for her. When the next day came, from the very morning the Russian wanted to meet the little girl. However, since she had not yet returned to their estate, he was unable to do so. He didn't understand why a little girl like her was so hard to reach. He couldn't believe that she hadn't returned from a separate pavilion all night. He eventually even became afraid for her life and assumed that something could have happened to her because of Chloe. He was so worried that he couldn't find a place for himself throughout the entire day. So, in the end, the Russian decided to go to a separate pavilion himself and check everything. When he ran to the entrance to the estate, he saw Coco sleeping right on the threshold of the door. He looked at her in surprise and did not understand why a child was sleeping in this place. In the end, he was even afraid that Chloe might get angry and just kick her out. He couldn't believe that his sister decided to treat the girl who cured his dear Sander this way. The man was not going to leave all this, so he picked up Coco and realized that he had to take advantage of this opportunity, because Sander had been looking for this girl since the morning. He also decided to go to Chloe before this in order to say a few words to her and take the child to his place, because he really believed that there was no need to stay there. When he entered the estate, he immediately shouted, turning to Chloe. He asked how she dared to do this to the benefactor of his Sander. He said that the baby was wonderful. However, as soon as he entered the estate, he immediately fell silent because he did not expect to see something like this. For some reason, it was very noisy there. There were all sorts of similar women walking around who had unfamiliar faces to him, and the head maid was nowhere to be seen. He realized that something strange had happened that night, and he eventually went to the living room to wait for Chloe. The man put Coco on the sofa so that she could continue sleeping, but he himself realized that this little one and that stubborn one should not be left unattended, even for a day, because they will turn everything upside down. While he was waiting for his sister, he watched how peacefully the girl slept. He found her quite cute even in her sleep. However, he still didn't understand how long she was going to sleep. He also noticed that during this time she became even more unkempt. But this was not surprising. As soon as she entered, Chloe probably told her to get out. The man had absolutely no idea what was so good about this, and why Coco wanted to stay with her so much. At that moment, the girl suddenly woke up when he called Chloe's name. She immediately sat up and screamed her name too, Rose. Seeing such a sharp reaction, he immediately jumped away from her. He said that she scared him very much. But the girl continued to turn from side to side, and asked if her sister was really nowhere to be found. Then Coco finally turned her head in his direction, and seeing the situation she was now in, he asked if it was really he who brought her to this place, because she clearly remembered that she was on the street. Ruth stroked her head and said that everything was exactly like that. And after that, he asked what she had done that made her get kicked out into the street. The girl was very indignant at his assumption and said that no one had kicked her out. She had simply left on her own. The man hated it most when people lied to him, so he asked why she didn't want to confess to him. It was obvious that she had been kicked out. Coco looked at him in surprise, but the man said that since she wanted to stay at their house so much, she should come back. He would appoint her as Sander's personal veterinarian and buy her everything she liked. But he hadn't yet managed to say all his proposals when suddenly Chloe came into the room and said that he needed to stop teasing her. And it wasn't she who kicked her out. At that moment, the maids had already brought them tea. Chloe sat down opposite her brother, and he said that the heartless bitch had finally deigned to appear. Ruth asked why the girl was sleeping in the hallway outside in such cold weather, since she claims that she didn't kick her out. Chloe was very surprised when she heard about the hallway. She asked, what nonsense was he talking about? After all, she was preparing a separate room for her to sleep with all the amenities. Coco felt uneasy about the way they were arguing, so she interrupted their conversation and said that she had gone out to admire the sparkling light that was coming through the window. But in the end, she fell asleep from this wonderful warmth of the sun's rays. At that moment, she was very angry with herself because in this way, she almost exposed her little sister as a very evil person. The man, of course, didn't believe that such a thing had ever happened. But Chloe suddenly smiled and asked what the point was of going out to watch and then falling asleep. Coco answered something to her, but Roos didn't pay attention to it because he was very surprised when he saw the smile on his sister's face. The man then looked around and realized that even this gloomy mansion had somehow brightened a little. It was definitely different from the one he had been in the last time. He looked at Coco and Chloe, who were calmly talking to each other, and realized that it was as if his sister had returned to the time before she fell into madness. He suggested that perhaps even Coco could have changed her a little, and seriously thought about the fact that this was most likely even true. After they finished speaking, Roos cleared his throat and said that he had come to this place for a reason. He wanted to tell Chloe something. She looked at her brother with suspicion and asked what happened. She also asked him to say something and leave quickly. Then the Russian realized that in relation to other people, she certainly had not changed one bit. He nervously smiled and asked if she remembered that they had brought a tiger from the Grand Duchy of Rivera, and so he found out this morning that this tiger had escaped from their cage. Chloe thought about this animal and remembered that this was the tiger that their father brought back during the war. Coco, upon hearing about the tiger, immediately asked what it was. The man, upon hearing this question, was very surprised. He couldn't believe that she didn't know anything about these animals yet. The man then decided to tell her in more detail that, in fact, all the animals in this world were divided into 3 specific types. Firstly, there were the so-called animals, such ordinary creatures as his sander dogs or mice. He is sure that Coco met them quite often. Secondly, there were so-called spiritual beasts, although they looked like animals, but they received God's blessing and had special abilities. They are fierce, but sometimes they made a pact with chosen people, which was quite impressive. There were also divine beasts. These could be said to be sacred creatures that appear in the legends of their empire. Little is known about them. However, Coco should have remembered that they are very strong. Then the girl assumed that a very strong tiger must have escaped, since they were so worried. Roos agreed and said that everything is true. They say they are giving a huge reward for him, but no one has been able to find him yet. Be that as it may, the father must return in order to find him and also resolve the situation with Coco. But Chloe intervened in the conversation and said that by that time she would already be kicked out, so she had to be careful. The girl, upon hearing this, was very upset. Of course, she did not like the prospect of leaving her little sister. She would certainly be kicked out if she did not succeed. She assumed that she had missed something. She believed that she should continue to stay close to her sister and thought about what was the way to resolve this seemingly hopeless situation. At that moment, the brother and sister were arguing with each other because Rusu really didn't like the fact that she said about Coco leaving. But the girl intervened in their conversation. She asked what would happen if she caught this tiger herself. When the Russian heard this, he immediately burst out laughing. He said that this was all nonsense. A 5-year-old girl definitely couldn't catch such a powerful creature. But after thinking about it, he said that his father was a supporter of their cult power. So perhaps, if she can do this, then in this way she will be able to avoid exile. This is exactly what Coco was hoping to hear. So she smiled happily and said that in that case, they would go in search of the tiger, and the refusal of guardianship would not affect her because she still wanted to be Chloe's younger sister. Then, the woman intervened in their conversation and asked the girl to stop talking nonsense. She was small and weak, so she definitely couldn't do anything there. She asked with a hint of aggression in her voice if the girl really wanted to get involved in something dangerous again and end up getting hurt. Coco already wanted to say something, but didn't have time because Chloe simply asked them to leave because she didn't want to talk about it anymore. After this, the girl believed that despite the fact that her sister said so, however, she only did this because she was worried about her. That's why Coco was very serious about finding the tiger, so she could show her that she was a very strong puppy. She decided to use her superpower, which was given to her by the side of dogs, and called all the animals with whom she had been communicating all this time in the estate in one place. When they were all gathered, the girl turned to them and said that she really needed their help. First, Coco needed to find out where this tiger was when she told her friends about what she wanted to do. Then, of course, neither the Mouse Emperor nor Sander were happy about it. They didn't understand how such a small puppy like her could catch a strong spiritual beast. The Mouse King even protested. He said that a tiger would simply eat a mouse like him in one bite. Coco realized that neither Sander nor the Mouse King could help her in this matter, so she asked them if there was at least some animal that could do this. Her friends, of course, did not want to upset the girl. However, they said that such things did not exist. Besides, you want to leave this place was too risky, but she didn't know what to do in that case. First, she needed to find the tiger to do something, so she tried to come up with some new plan on how she could do it without outside help. But then, suddenly, she heard a very important phrase from the Emperor of the Mice, and asked him to tell her about a place where his instincts told him not to go. She believed that this is where the tiger should be. Of course, the mouse did not expect this, but he had no choice. He had to help Coco. The Mouse Emperor had to accompany someone on this journey. Despite the fact that he had such a great title, in fact, he was trembling with fear when the girl took him and carried him. He wasn't at all thrilled about this mission, but Coco assured him that she would put him to sleep thoroughly before meeting the tiger, so he definitely didn't have to be afraid. The Mouse King immediately told her this way, but when she went there, he replied that it was impossible. It was too dangerous. He was really afraid of his death, but the girl said that she would protect him so he would not actually die. The mouse's reaction was obvious, because weak animals instinctively fear places where there are terrible predators. But how could we know that if they found a place that avoided us, we could meet a tiger? She needed to do this when she had already moved quite a large distance from the castle. Then King Masha suddenly squealed. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked what had happened. And he, in turn, replied that he felt something terrible because her short dog paws were about to step right into the tiger's den. And as soon as Coco took the next step, She immediately heard a loud roar from this fairy tiger that appeared right in front of her. The girl certainly didn't expect this. The Mouse King was incredibly scared, so she put him in a specially prepared bag and told him not to worry. She allowed him to fall asleep and said that when everything was safe, she would wake him up again after the hallucination of the tiger's growl passed. Coco realized that since the Mouse King was worried, the lair must be somewhere nearby, but the area around was quite wide, so she didn't understand how she was supposed to find the real him. Coco had no choice, so she started to simply walk from side to side and look into every hollow behind every tree and bush in search of that very tiger. Quite a lot of time had passed since then, but she still hadn't managed to find him, and because of this, Coco was very upset. She didn't know what to do because she needed to find this tiger before the Duke returned. In that case, she had very little time left, but then, suddenly, Coco looked to the side and saw a rather large dent in the grass. She didn't even understand why the grass there wasn't swaying, because the wind was blowing quite strongly. It was quite strange, as if there was a huge animal sitting there that had just crushed this grass. At that moment, one thought came to Coco. Perhaps this really was the very tiger she was looking for. In fact, it is said that spirit beasts had special abilities. Therefore, if the tiger has a special ability due to which no one can find it, then this meant that most likely the tiger was right in front of her. At that moment, Coco turned to him and said that she found him near the tiger, immediately broke his invisibility, and the girl saw him in full growth. The animal was very shocked. It could not understand how she even knew that he was there. Until that moment, he had been using his abilities and no one had ever seen him. But she somehow found him, but for some reason, he didn't feel disgust towards this girl. On the contrary, he even wanted to talk to her. He assumed that perhaps this child had some kind of special ability. He immediately took out his claw and wrote a phrase on the grass that asked if the girl had seen him. Coco saw that he had written something, but she couldn't make out the words. She explained that she could talk to her animal friends and gave her name so that he wouldn't be afraid of her. The girl said that she had been looking for him all this time, and also asked why he had run away so far. Whom did she suggest that he come back with her? She would introduce him to her sister, and then they could play together. The tiger cub suddenly lowered his head down. Of course he wanted to say that he couldn't do this, because there wasn't that special thing there that he wanted to see again. The girl immediately realized that something had happened to him. In fact, the tiger was still able to talk to her. He told her his story. Initially, he lived in a very cold cage because of the war with the spirits, so everyone around him was afraid of him and other spirit beasts, and people avoided him, and no one wanted to talk to him. However, there was one person who was not afraid of him, and in the end, the tiger decided to open his heart to him in response. Anyway, no one showed any interest in him anymore. Cuckoo, having heard about this, immediately understood that the ending here would be unhappy, which meant that the tiger cub was also wounded, and he was very sad and lonely all this time. In the end, he didn't tell the end of the story because he felt uncomfortable and was already ready to agree to go with the girl. But suddenly she stopped and said that she had a very big interest in him, so she told you that it must have been very difficult to live alone.